Players that are fighting Nex are currently making over 10 mil GP an hour, and I am here to teach you how to fight this boss. Hey everybody, it is Dak here from the Ed Boys, and welcome to my Nex guide. This will be my in-depth guide with a lot of information and timestamps that you can skip around on, but I also have a beginner's guide, which is a lot shorter with just the basic information that'll be linked in the description. If you've been enjoying the videos lately or just getting useful information out of them, be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and follow me on Twitch for even more content. Thank you for the support, everybody. To fight Nex, you'll need to complete the Frozen Door mini quest. This quest involves getting the Frozen Key, which is built with 4 key pieces, each piece dropped by a different God Wars dungeon boss. It is a 100% chance to get the Frozen Key piece from the God Wars dungeon generals, so basically you just need 1 KC in each Bandos, Sarah, Arma, and Zami to be able to get to Nex. It is worth noting that you can get the key piece from any of the bodyguards from these bosses at a 1 in 20 chance, but overall you should be able to manage 1 kill at each of these 4 bosses if you're looking to fight Nex. The difficulty in fighting Nex is much more about having high stats and good gear. I suggest having at least 90 in each of your combat stats outside of prayer. You will be using melee and range during the fight, but having a high magic level is also going to raise your magic defense, lowering the amount of damage that you take during this fight. You can get Nex kills with low stats, but if the entire team is rocking low stats and budget gear, it's definitely going to be more difficult to get enough damage in, especially while you're learning the fight. As for prayer, I do suggest having at least 74 prayer and rigor unlocked. Not necessarily a requirement, but a big difference overall. I will say piety is pretty much a requirement though. Most of the damage that you're going to do is going to be with melee, and piety makes a very big difference in your DPS. Nex also requires having a team of players. You're not going to manage to solo Nex. Nex is very possible to do in a duo, but if you're learning, I definitely don't suggest starting with duos. When you hit like the 4 to 5 man team, you have a very good balance of making the fight easy, but also not quite getting up to like a mass. We have had up to 10 teammates in one night during our next Saturdays and still managed over 50 mil apiece on that night thanks to a Nile Horn and Zarya Van Brace's drop. So your team size can vary depending on your preferences, but overall there's a lot of Nex gains to be had no matter the size of team. There are mass worlds, so you can get some Nex KC if you have nobody to join you, but it is going to be significantly more profitable to get a small team of like 4 or 5 players going and grinding out kills with them. There are some clans like Nex FFA that are often taking players for free-for-all Nex gains. Free-for-all is still going to make you a lot of money when you do get the drop, but going for splits is going to be more consistent GP gains. So your gear setup is also very important for Nex. You don't need max gear by any means to get Nex kills, but better DPS is going to make a big difference in the speed of the fight. She does have a lot of health. The more teammates that you have, the less damage each player needs to do, so larger teams can also help when you have low DPS. It's worth noting that you can use range only if you want to at Nex. In Mass Worlds, it's very convenient to use range only, and overall range does get the job done, but Nex is far weaker to stab than she is to range, so we'll be talking about using a range and melee hybrid. So generally the minimum gear requirement that I tell any new players joining me at Nex would be the Osmumten's Fang, Amulet of Blood Fury, and then any decent range switch like a crossbow and some God D'hide armor can still get the job done. Often we do have a couple players on the team with very solid DPS, so I will say that if you're in a team of like 4 to 5 and everyone there has bare minimum gear and you're all learning Nex, you'll probably struggle on the first few kills while learning, but eventually you'll be avoiding all of that avoidable damage, and the Osmumten's Fang should generally carry you through the kill DPS wise. It is also important to have at least 1 ancient item on you, like ancient boots or the ancient coif. When you leave Nex's lair, you're going to be teleported into the area just outside the bank with all of those aggressive monsters, and if you have an ancient item on you, it'll make you safe, plus the altar in the room gives you a little bit better bonus if you're wearing an ancient item when you pray at it. So in this gear section, I'm going to go over each gear slot and go from best in slot down to the worst that I would bring, and then for the range switch, we're going to be going over that in the inventory section of the guide. We'll start with that helmet, Torva being best in slot, with the Nate is not face guard being a close second and much cheaper. The Serpentine helm is still a solid option, but also gives some poison immunity, which is convenient because you will be poisoned early in the next fight occasionally. After that, you could go for the helm of Nate is not. There is a little bit of use for the face mask or the Slayer helm, which has a face mask in it, but we'll be talking about that when we talk about Nex's smoke phase. The Infernal Cape is best in slot for melee, with the Fire Cape coming in second. After that, you could go for the Mythical Cape, the Ardoin Cloak, or even a Trim to Skill Cape. In your next slot, the Amulet of Torture is best in slot, but the Blood Fury is extremely helpful during Nex. Nex does a large amount of chip damage. It's often like the most complained about part of the fight is the chip damage. Using a Blood Fury significantly reduces the amount of bruise that you're going to use here, and in general, it will make the fight a lot easier. We do have a couple players join us that aren't using the Blood Fury, so it's definitely not required, but everyone anyone that has joined me and switched over to a Blood Fury has not switched back to that torture. If you don't have the Blood Fury, then a regular Fury is still a solid option for DPS and defense boost. Your ammo slot does depend on your range switch, so generally this is going to be either Dragon Arrows or Enchanted Ruby Dragon Bolts. If you're using a Bofa, then you don't need ammo and you could go for a Blessing and some prayer bonus. The Ancient Blessing is a good option in that case, since you want to have a piece of ancient gear on you for when you leave Nex's lair and when you use the altar in the lair. Nex is weak to stab, so the best in slot weapon for Nex is the Osmumten's Fang. The Fang is extremely accurate, and it's pretty much the one thing that I would consider a requirement for the Nex fight. The Grazi Rapier was used a lot at Nex before the Fang came out, so clearly you can get the job done without the Fang. The Rapier is a little more expensive than the Fang, so that's kind of a weird example, but in general, technically not a requirement. That being said, the Osmumten's Fang is the way to go. If you really want to make good money at Nex, step 1, have friends. Step 2, get an Osmumten's Fang, and step 3, profit. The Avernic Defender is currently best in slot for your shield, with the Dragon Defender coming in second. After that, I would go for the Obsidian Shield, also known as the Toxket Zil. It's got a decent strength bonus on it, some pretty good defense. Overall, if you're looking for Nex kills, you probably can get your Dragon Defender at this point. In the chest and the leg slot, it's actually very good to wear your range gear, since range gear tends to have very good magic defense on it. As you get more comfortable with Nex, you can wear Torva or Bandos in these slots and then bring the range switch. You'll get a little bit better DPS, but in general, it's good to just go for range gear in these slots. The Fortified Masori body has some great magic defense while also being best in slot and range. If you haven't fortified your Masori, then it's not going to be as helpful because unfortified armor has very bad defensive stats. The Bofa is a good range weapon here, and if you're bringing the Bofa, you're going to want to bring the Crystal chest and legs. They don't have as good mage defense as the next couple options, but they're still solid. The Carols top and bottom have very good magic defense. At many bosses, I have suggested using Blessed D'hide instead of Carols, but here I would say the other way around. Carols is the way to go. If you are going to be rocking a piece of Blessed D'hide armor, it is a good idea to go with Ancient D'hide to count as your ancient item. In the glove slot, the Ferocious gloves are going to be best in slot. The Barrows gloves are a close second. If you're wearing Ferocious gloves, you definitely want to bring a range glove switch like the Zarya Vambraces. You could also bring the Barrows gloves for the range switch, but honestly, if you're going to be bringing Barrows gloves at all, you should just only bring Barrows gloves and not bring a glove switch. The Barrows gloves have a very solid defense bonus on them, so they're very nice for using less potions at Nex. Your best boot option is going to be the Primordial boots. Primordial boots are very expensive for a tiny boost, so honestly, Dragon boots are still fine. The Ancient D'hide boots also can be solid. If you haven't decided on an ancient item for when you're leaving Nex's lair, the Ancient D'hide boots are the way to go. Of course, they won't help you with melee damage, but they do provide a little bit more mage defense than those melee boots, so they're good for learning Nex. And finally, we have the ring slot. The Lightbearer is great for special attacks, so if you have a Voidwaker or a Zaret crossbow, those are both very good special attacks, and the Lightbearer is the way to go. If you have the Osmumten's Fang, that special attack's not too bad, but at that point, having the Berserker ring would still be better, and of course, if you have an Ultor ring instead, that would be even better than the Berserker ring. Now let's talk about the inventory setup. First, we'll go over your range switches. As you're learning Nex, it is better to bring less switches so that you can bring more brews, but as you get consistent with your kills and you're not using all your brews every time, you are going to want to add more switches to increase your DPS. The Twisted Bow and the Zaret Crossbow are both extremely helpful during the fight. At the moment, Zaret Crossbow's a little bit better at Nex, mostly because of those Ruby Bolt procs. The Twisted Bow is very close in DPS against Nex herself, and then it's actually a little bit better using the Twisted Bow against the bodyguards because they have lower health. That means you're less likely to hit like 110 from a Zaret Crossbow spec. Overall, crossbows are just very good at Nex. Since she has so much health, your Ruby Bolt procs will often hit 100 damage or 110 with the ZCB. Plus, if you're wearing a crossbow, that means you can bring a ranged shield, which can be good for giving you some more ranged accuracy and really helpful for increasing your defensive stats so you don't take as much damage during the fight. The Zaret and the Armadillo crossbows are both good DPS, but they also have a range of 8 squares compared to only 7 squares if you're using the Dragon crossbow. Each square further that you can stand back during her shadow phase is going to be helpful for taking less damage. The Bofa's not actually great against Nex. It's still fine for your range switch as long as you're bringing crystal armor with you too. The Bofa and the T-Bow can reach from 10 squares away while on rapid, so it is easier to be standing far away from Nex if you're using the bows. But overall, I would say the order from best to worst range weapons at Nex, in my opinion, would go Twisted Bow, Zaret crossbow, Armadillo crossbow, Bofa, and then Dragon crossbow. As for your other ranged switches, it is important to bring your Ava's device, preferably the Ava's assembler since it has a ranged strength boost on it. The Necklace of Anguish is also nice for DPS, and then that Masori mask switch also has that +2 range strength on it. Make sure if you're bringing Masori, you try to get that stuff fortified. It is a lot better for defense if you fortify your Masori. In the gear section of the guide, I did suggest that you just wear your range top and bottom with you. If you're not using that many brews, you can wear Bandos or Torva while you're using melee and bring a Masori or a Carol's switch with you too. So the Void Waker is the best special attack weapon for Nex, followed very closely by the Zarite crossbow. So if you don't have a Void Waker, but you are using a Zarite crossbow, then you don't need to bring a special attack weapon switch with you. The Void Waker is very good because it does have 100% accuracy, it hits very hard, and it's only a 4-tick weapon, so you can dump back-to-back specs very quickly. You can also use the Void Waker spec while Nex is deflecting melee during her final phase, because Void Waker spec technically is a magic attack, so she won't deflect any of that damage back. If you don't have the Void Waker or the ZCB, that is fine. You can still just use your Osmumten's Fang special attack for some more DPS. The big special attack weapons are not a requirement. It's not really worth it to bring the Dragon Warhammer to lower Nex's defense. Her defense levels can only be lowered by 10 levels maximum, so we don't really bother with it. At the bottom of the inventory, we have the rune pouch with some thralls in it, so that would be blood runes, cosmic runes, and fire runes. Also, don't forget your Book of the Dead. Thralls are very helpful during the next fight. It does require 2 extra Invy spaces, so I don't suggest bringing Thralls early in your next kills as you're trying to learn. You're going to want to bring a lot of brews in your first few trips. Once you feel like you can afford those 2 Invy spaces, Thralls are very good for Nex. The Mage Thrall is best to use. Both the Ghost and the Skeleton attack from a longer range than the Zombie, but the Ghost starts attacking 1 tick faster, making it a little bit more efficient. I do have 2 Super Combats and 2 Ranging Potions at the top of the inventory. If we're planning on doing just a 1-kill trip, and we know that for sure, then I usually just bring the 1 Ranging Potion, but if we have a larger team or we're getting longer trips in general, I'll bring that 2nd Ranging Pot with me. Overall, you are sipping a lot of Saradomin brews, so after you heal up heavily, you do want to resip your Super Combat or your Ranging Potion, depending on what phase of the fight you're in. It is very important to stay potted up and get as much DPS as you can. The rest of the Invy is really brews and restores. I do have a couple of anglerfish in there too. Those are kind of nice for like a combo eat, and a little bit of hard food in general is nice to use instead of a brew when you can. I do have a Sanfu Serum snuck in there as one of my super restores. The Sanfu Serum is an anti-poison and a super restore in 1 potion, and there is a portion of the fight that you can get poisoned. You can also pre-sip an anti-poison of some kind before you go in the room to deal with that poison. Early on, you're probably going to want to bring like 10, maybe 10 plus Saradomin brews, depending on your team size to be fair, but you can go through a lot of brews if you're making a lot of mistakes during the fight. So while learning, your inventory will be mostly yellow. Eventually, you can narrow it down to really like 2 or 3 brews per kill sometimes. Often in teams of 5 to 6, we'll have a couple teammates who hardly use a full brew during a kill, so you can actually just bring in mostly food and you don't have to burn through that many brews. If you're doing more like 2 to 3 man teams, then you are going to still be using a decent amount of brews, but that's also going to mean for a lot of splits. For the most part, the brews are really only a problem for an Iron Man, since those Nex splits are heavily going to make up for any potions used. But overall, the better you get at Nex, the more you can narrow down the supplies you have to use. Next, we'll talk about how to travel to Nex and grinding out Ancient Essence to get into Nex's room. Nex is located in the God Wars dungeon behind the Frozen Door, which you likely have traveled to already since that's where you complete the Frozen Door mini quest. If you have done any tier of your combat achievements, you can use the Gommel's Hill to teleport outside of God Wars dungeon. The Trollium teleport will take you to the top of the mountain nearby God Wars, and then you could even use a Games Necklace to go to Birthwarp and make the long walk all the way to God Wars dungeon that I've been showing here. But overall, how you get to God Wars is not as important while you're grinding Nex, because there is a bank just before you get into Nex. You don't really have to worry about using up Invy space for your travel, and you don't have to wear your full Nex gear to the dungeon. Instead, you should just wear a range setup like a blowpipe and whatever your best range gear happens to be, but also don't forget an ancient item, and then you're going to take less damage if you bring a Saradomin item and an Armadillo item. You can survive running through that first area with a little bit of food, but it's a little safer just to bring the Sarah and Arma item. You should also bring a ranging potion, a few prayer potions for gathering KC, and an anti-poison of some sort, because you can get poisoned while getting KC. So to get into the bank area before Nex, you are going to need 40 ancient kills, same as you would need 40 Bandos kills to get into Grerador, 40 Arma kills to get into Kree, and so on. If you've completed certain tiers of your combat achievements, then you will need less ancient KC to get into Nex's room each time. It's also worth noting, these kills that you need to farm to get in the boss room, they are called Essence. So with 40 ancient essence, you can get into the boss room. This has nothing to do with ancient essence, the farmable item from Phantom Muspa. So when I say ancient essence, I'm just talking about like this little corner KC, not the actual item. When fighting monsters in the Ancient Prison, you are going to get multiple Ancient Essence for each kill, so you don't have to kill 40 monsters to get in each time. The Spiritual Mages give 5 Essence per kill, the Blood Reavers give 3 Essence, and the other creatures give 2 Essence per kill. Also, for each Ancient piece of gear that you're wearing, you get a 20% chance to get an extra Essence for each kill. So basically, just protect from magic, tag a bunch of Spiritual Mages and Blood Reavers, and then auto-retaliate your way into a bunch of Essence. You do want to get more than the 40 Essence or just one bank trip before you go in and get Nex kills, because you need another 40 Essence to access the bank after you leave Nex's lair. So if you're preparing to grind Nex for like a long night, I usually stack up like 300 Essence before heading into the bank area, but if you die during Nex, you will lose all of the Essence you've had. I've definitely lost a couple hundred Essence at a time, so you got to be careful. If you have any questions about getting to the Ancient Prison or how the Ancient Essence works, let me know in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Now let's start talking about how to actually fight Nex. Overall, there's not any individual mechanic in the fight that's difficult to do, but there's enough minor details that it does feel like there's a lot to learn. So in each section, I'm going to go into some deep detail about what you can do to avoid damage and increase your DPS. Some of you might find that this is too much information to start with, and if that is the case, I do suggest skipping to the full example fight section of the guide and just watching a fight from start to finish before getting like an overload in details. First, we'll go over the basics of the fight and what Nex does in each phase. When Nex spawns, she will first summon each of her bodyguards one by one before beginning the fight. They are Fumus, Umbra, Cruor, and Glacies. There will be 5 phases during the fight, and they correlate with the different spells on the Ancient Spellbook. So you'll have the Smoke Phase, Shadow Phase, Blood Phase, Ice Phase, and finally a Zaros Phase to end the fight. These phases also correlate with the bodyguards. Smoke Phase has Fumus, Umbra is the Shadow bodyguard, Cruor is the Blood bodyguard, and Glacies is the Ice one. There's no extra bodyguard for the Zaros phase though. At that point, you just have to kill Nex. Each of the first 4 phases also are going to have 2 different special attacks that you're going to have to deal with. So Nex spawns in her bodyguards and the fight will begin in Smoke Phase. Nex will use magic and melee attacks, so you should be protecting from magic. This is also the only phase that you can get poisoned in. She's going to choose her target in the room before you can actually start attacking, so do not attack Nex until you see her say, "Let the virus flow through you." That first attack will always be her choke special attack. She's going to target the player furthest away from her with the cough. While a player is coughing, they're going to lose prayer points every 2 ticks, and it'll drain your stats depending on what your highest attack bonus is. So if you're wearing your melee gear, it's going to drain your attack, strength, and defense, and if you're wearing your range gear, it'll drain your range level. Also, if you stand next to a player, you're going to spread the cough to them. If you're wearing a face mask or a Slayer helm, since that has a face mask in it, it will cut the time that you have the cough in half. And also, if you're wearing a face mask, then another player can't spread the cough to you. That being said, I don't really bother bringing the face mask in, even though I am the cough tank. It's a very minimal loss in stats, and you can make up for it with a Super Restore Sip or a pre-sipped Menophyte Remedy. So every 6th attack Nex uses will be a special attack, and she's always alternating between the 2 different special attacks during the phase. So the fight starts, she'll use Choke, she'll then use 5 regular attacks, then she'll use the Smoke Dash. When she starts this attack, she's going to say "there is," and she's about to perform a dash attack in one of the 4 middle paths in the room. She is going to spin to the direction that she's going to attack before she goes to that direction, so you do have time to react and dodge it. After she uses that dash attack, she'll use 5 of her regular attacks, then she'll use the choke attack again, and this pattern will continue throughout the smoke phase. 5 attacks, another smoke dash, 5 attacks, another cough. But Nex does have this weird like drag attack she can use. She's just gonna drag you in towards her and turn off your overhead prayer. The attack is pretty uncommon, so you might sometimes forget that this is even a thing. When Nex reaches 80% health, 2,720 health to be exact, she is going to shout, "Fumus, don't fail me," and now Nex is going to be invincible, but Fumus is vulnerable instead, so you can go over and kill him. Fumus uses magic, so everyone should be using Protect from Magic still. Fumus is weak to stab, so the Osmumten's Fang technically is the best DPS there, but it's best to spread out since she could be using that choke special attack, so 1 player max should run up to Fumus and use melee. He's still pretty weak to range, so your range switch should be solid. When Fumus dies, you will now be in the Shadow Phase, and you can attack Nex again. During the Shadow Phase, Nex uses range attacks instead of magic, so switch over to Protect from Range. Protecting from range will reduce any range hits you take by 50%. Nex also does more damage if you're standing close to her during the phase. The further you are away, the less damage you take, so that's why it's preferable to use range. You can definitely squeeze in some Fang hits during this phase, but it's really not suggested while you're trying to learn Nex. Nex now has 2 different special attacks, and she'll alternate them every 5 regular attacks, though the first attack of the phase will always be a spec. If the last special attack that she used during the smoke phase was that dash attack where she says there is no escape, then she's going to start the shadow phase by using Shadow Smash. She will say fear the shadow and spawn shadows underneath each player's feet. In a couple seconds, those shadows will do damage to anybody still standing on them. The other spec is Embrace Darkness. She shouts Embrace Darkness and the room gets a lot darker. If you stand close to Nex, the room will get even darker and you'll begin to take damage from Nex's shadow every tick. This is one of the most dangerous attacks that Nex has. If Nex begins to chase you while you're embracing darkness, you can start getting hit by that lawnmower, which has taken many lives in Nex's lair. Nex runs as fast as you do, so it's kind of difficult to get away from Nex while she's chasing you and doing damage the whole time. If you do cut the corners in the middle of the arena, it will give you a little space between you and Nex, since she is a little bit larger and she can't cut those corners as well. Also, this is a good time to combo eat some solid food with a Ceridome Brew to try and safe up. So while Nex is trying to run up to somebody and use a melee attack, if she can't get that attack off for about 8 ticks because either she's chasing them down or she's been like kiting around while a player is hiding under her, she will instead skip across the arena a little bit and begin using that range attack again. We will talk about this mechanic even more in the targeting section of the guide and in the full fight section of the guide. So while you're trying to run away from Nex and she's using that lawnmower on you, eventually she is going to skip in front of you, but then she's going to stop chasing you after that and you should be able to get to a safe distance. This skip mechanic is not only helpful for while you're trying to get away from her though. During the entire shadow phase, your goal is to be far away from Nex, so the strategy is to stand at the end of one of the paths while keeping Nex in the center. As long as she's only using range attacks and you're standing at that outer edge of her attacks, ranging her back, the phase is pretty simple, but occasionally she'll target a player with melee and she's going to start running towards the stack of players. If you step under Nex as she gets close to you, you can force her to skip back to the center again. She will not always bounce back immediately, so it does require moving around under her while she tries to find you sometimes. It is best to stand under her while she's in one of those straight paths because that way she can only walk back and forth in 2 directions as opposed to being out in the open, which makes it more difficult to stay under her. If she manages to get out from under whoever she is targeting before she skips away, then it is best to kind of just start running away. You still can get back under her and get her to skip, but if you see her use an attack while you're all standing under her, the safest bet is to dip. Try not to run near Umbra. You don't want Nex to be anywhere near Umbra when it's time to kill that bodyguard. Once Nex is at 2040 health, she's going to shout, Umbra, don't fail me, and it's now time to go kill Umbra with your range weapon. Umbra will be using magic attacks, and she can hit pretty hard. Whoever is closest to Umbra when Nex calls for her, or the first person to get into her attack range if she didn't see anybody, is going to be Umbra's target. If you're the one being targeted by Umbra, you do want to use Protect from Magic, and then try to stay out of Nex's range by standing up close to Umbra. All the other players in the team should generally stay away from Umbra, making it a little bit easier to skip Nex back to the center of the room if she starts running up to them. If you are the Umbra tank and Nex manages to get all the way up to Umbra, you do want to switch back to protect range and then run far away. If everybody just runs away from Umbra, Nex is going to have to target somebody and she'll run away from Umbra too. As Umbra dies, Nex will shout, flood my lungs with blood. Kind of intense. Nex will be vulnerable again and the blood phase will begin. Nex will now be using magic attacks again, so you won't need to protect from range from her anymore. Also, Nex's magic attacks for the rest of the fight will drain your prayer a little bit. This can be cut in half by using a spectral spirit shield, but honestly, the spectral really isn't worth it. You'll just have to sip a few more super restores. So protect magic and start stabbing Nex again. Nex's magic attacks in this phase are blood spells, so she's going to be healing herself when she hits you. These blood spells during this phase will only target one player at a time, but they also hit a 3x3 area around the target, so it is best to try and spread out as much as possible. Once you get up to like 5+ players, it's not as easy to spread out, but 5 fangs are going to get you through the phase pretty quickly either way. She has 2 different special attacks now that she's going to alternate through during this blood phase. If the last special attack during the shadow phase was Embrace Darkness, then she's going to start with her Siphon special attack. She's going to shout, a Siphon will solve this, and spawn some Blood Reavers in the room. The more players in the room, the more Blood Reavers that she can spawn, but it's not really a consistent number. One time we actually had 0 Blood Reavers spawn when we had a 3-man team going, but only one time, so I wouldn't expect that to happen. When she spawns the Blood Reavers, she will kneel down for like 5 seconds. While she's kneeling down, any damage that you do to her will actually heal her instead, so you don't want to attack her while she's kneeling. Instead, you can kill the Blood Reavers. Anytime that she spawns Blood Reavers in with this special attack, if there are any other Blood Reavers in the room from the last time she used it, those ones will die and Nex will be healed for however much health the Blood Reavers still had. With a team of 3 or more, you can generally ignore the Blood Reavers once it's time to go kill Cruor, but until she shouts for her bodyguard, you should KO the Blood Reavers. Her other blood special attack is the Blood Sacrifice. If her last special attack during the Shadow phase was Fear the Shadow, then she will start the Blood phase with this spec. She shouts, "I demand a Blood Sacrifice," and 1 player on the team will turn red. You have like 4 seconds to run at least 7 tiles away, or you're going to be hit by a big mage hit that is also going to heal Nex for a lot of health. I'm usually not paying too much attention on running exactly 7 tiles away, to be honest. Just if you see your character turn red when she uses the sacrifice, you run away. So remember, she'll be alternating special attacks and she'll use a spec every 6th attack. So if she starts the phase by spawning Blood Reavers, she'll then use 5 regular attacks, then Blood Sacrifice, then 5 regular attacks, then Blood Reavers, and so on. At 1360 health, she'll shout, "Cruor, don't fail me." The team will go over and kill Cruor. Cruor is actually weak to slash, so a good melee setup and switching the Fang to slash is not a bad option, but the T-bow is still really going to do a little better. And overall, using your ranged weapon is a good option because you want to be spread out from Nex's mage attack. Once Cruor is dead, she will shout, "Infuse me with ice," and the ice phase will begin. Her magic attack will now be freezes, so it is important to keep your protect from magic on. If the last special attack that she used in the blood phase was the Blood Reavers, then she's going to start the ice phase by using the Ice Prison special attack. She's going to pick 1 player in the group and surround them with stalagmites. Multiple players can get stuck in this ice, even though she's only targeting 1 player if you guys are standing on the same square, so it is a little safer to be spread apart during this phase. If you do get stuck in this prison, it is going to turn off your overheads, so make sure to turn that protect magic back on. It is up to somebody else in the team who is outside of the prison to get you out of there, though. Somebody who is not trapped in the ice needs to use their Osmumten's Fang on one of the stalagmites, or the player in the ice is going to take a bunch of damage in a few seconds. You can use a crush weapon like the Dragon Warhammer to get them out of the ice, but the Fang is extremely accurate for it. If you're trapped in the ice and it looks like nobody's going to be able to get you out, then you can turn on protect from range to cut the damage from the ice in half. You don't actually have to run out of the ice. Somebody just has to destroy one of the stalagmites and you can still stand right in the middle and you'll be safe. So if somebody destroys like one of the corner ones and you can't run out of there, you're still fine. If the last spec that she used on the blood phase was the Blood Sacrifice attack, then her first special attack in the ice phase will be Containment. Next, we'll shout "Contain this," and in a couple of ticks, she'll surround herself with a bunch of ice. You have to make sure to step back from Nex before that ice pops up. If you do get hit by it, it's going to do a lot of damage and turn off your overhead prayer. If you do manage to get like frozen or just you're unable to walk out of the way, but you could still get over to your overheads in time, protect from range will cut the damage from this ice in half. Overall, the attack is very easy to dodge, but also if you keep your health high, you're not going to get KO'd by it. I'd say the most common time that I get hit by Contain This is like right when we're done with Umbra. We're all running back over to Nex. I may not have noticed that she said it and I just get popped by it. At 680 health left, she will finally ask Glacies for help. Glacies is weak to crush and the next best is range, so you just want to use range on Glacies. Her freeze attacks can hit through your prayer pretty easily, so be careful. If you're stuck near Glacies and Nex runs over to you to use that Contain This attack, you might have to switch over to that protect range. Overall, the ice phase is like the most simple one on paper, but also can be very dangerous, so be careful during the ice phase. Once you do kill Glacies, you'll send the fight into the final phase, the Zaros Phase. Not before Nex heals a cool 500 health though. How nice of her. There's no more special attacks during this phase. Instead, Nex is going to be shuffling through a couple of prayers. Nex will always be using Turmoil throughout the phase. This is not an overhead prayer, so you can't see that she's using it, but she is. Turmoil will raise her stats, and it makes it so that occasionally she drains from your stats, adding them to hers, so she's a lot stronger during this phase, and your stats are going to be being drained a little bit. The other prayers that she is using are overhead prayers, and she will change them every 5 attacks that she uses. So the beginning of the Zaros phase, she'll start with Soul Split. This prayer will heal her every time she does damage to you, making it more important to stand close to her so that she's using less magic attacks. Remember, Nex's magic attacks hit every player in the room except on that blood phase, so if she uses a magic attack while praying Soul Split, she can heal up a lot of health. After she attacks 5 times with Soul Split on, she's going to switch to Deflect Melee. This will not only protect her from melee damage, but it will deflect some of that damage back to you, so you should switch to your range setup while she's using Deflect. After 5 attacks with that Deflect on, she will just turn off her overheads, and then she'll attack 5 times without any overhead prayer on, then she'll turn on Soul Split and repeat the pattern. Zaros Phase can be pretty intense, since she hits hard, you do need to switch gear occasionally and whatnot. It's important to be staying within melee distance of Nex so that she uses as little magic as possible. If you need to heal, I do suggest stepping under Nex to do it. Do not run away from Nex. You also don't want to make Nex skip around during this phase by standing under her too long. So this means you should squeeze in 1, maybe 2 sips of Ceridome and Brew while you're standing under her, and then click back on the boss so that you start attacking and she starts attacking before she skips across the room. I'll be talking about this even more in the Nex's target section of the guide. When Nex gets to 0 health, she is going to use the Wrath Prayer. You have to run away from where she is while she's dying, or you'll take a bunch of damage, and then you can finally go ahead and pick up your loot. Once it is time to leave the room and you're out of supplies and you are going back to the bank, you can right-click on the altar in the room and teleport out. This is going to teleport you right outside of the bank area, so you do need another 40 essence to get in, or maybe less depending on your combat achievements. And you want to be wearing an ancient item so that you don't get attacked by the monsters outside. Now, you can get back into the room before they're going to KO you. It's just a little sketchy to not be wearing that ancient item. The altar in the room that you can use to teleport out can also be used to heal yourself up. You can only pray at the altar once every 10 minutes. Praying at the altar will restore your prayer points, but if you're wearing an ancient item while you pray at the altar, it'll also restore your health, your special attack, and your run energy. This can be very helpful in a few different scenarios during the fight. Ideally, if you have a very good spec weapon like the Voidwaker or the ZCB, you can use the altar to dump extra specs. This is convenient to do during the blood phase. Usually right around the time you're doing blood phase, you'll be standing close to the altar, and her magic attacks only target one player at a time during that phase. You can't use the altar while you're in combat, so you need to use it when Nex isn't attacking you, or when the Blood Reavers aren't attacking you either. Usually, if Nex is attacking you, right as she switches to somebody else as the target, that's a good time to attempt to pray. Also, towards the end of the fight, if things are getting very sketchy, it can be very helpful to use that altar to survive. I want to take a little bit deeper dive into dealing with Nex when she targets you. You don't have to put in the extra effort while being targeted, but dealing with this well can make a big difference for how many brews your team uses. Nex will always be looking to target one player in the room, but she will switch targets every few attacks. When she's choosing a target, she chooses it based off of who is closest to her, and then whoever has the lowest defense based off her current attack style if two people are the same distance from her. Since she's always changing targets and people could be sipping brews or could have their prayer off or something and defense stats could be a little different, it's not always insanely consistent who is about to be targeted next, and in general, just every player in the fight should be aware you might get targeted. When Nex targets a player, she can either use a melee attack, which is only going to hit that one player, or a magic attack, which will hit all players within her 10 tile attack range. Also, in the shadow phase of the fight, she does use range instead of magic. You can tell who's being targeted just by looking at who Nex is facing when she attacks. Even if she uses a magic attack that hits everyone, there's still one player that she's specifically targeting while she does it. If you are not being targeted, then you do want to use Protect from Magic, unless of course Shadow Phase. And if you are being targeted, your goal is to stay within melee range of Nex as often as possible and protect from melee. If you are not being targeted, then you do want to use Protect from Magic, unless of course Shadow Phase. Pretty much none of this applies in Shadow Phase. Stay away from her during Shadow Phase. If you are the target, your goal is to generally stay within melee range of Nex as often as possible and then protect from melee. You do not want to switch to protect from melee during the ice phase since she's using freeze spells and you don't want to get frozen, and then you don't want to protect melee during that shadow phase because you're protecting from range instead. For the smoke, the blood, and the Zaros phase, you definitely want to protect melee while she is targeting you. She can still use magic attacks while you're standing up close, but she'll melee more often, and anytime she uses a melee attack on just whoever's being targeted, that means the rest of the team is taking less damage from magic attacks. If you step under Nex while she is targeting you, she'll begin to kite around in an attempt to attack you again. The same thing that we talked about in the Shadow Phase and the Zaros Phase part of the guide. If you stand under her for too long, she will skip across the room a little bit. If you happen to stand under her for just one tick, then you can get her to not move at all. Nex attacks at a 4-tick pace, while the Osmumten's Fang attacks at a 5-tick pace. So if you step under her just before she attacks and then click on her to attack, you're going to stall her for that one extra tick, basically slowing Nex's attack speed from 4 to 5 ticks. The 1 tick might not feel like a lot, but over the course of a whole fight, you can make Nex use a lot less attacks. Just for example, a 6-minute kill would be 600 game ticks. Nex attacks at a 4-tick pace. That's 150 attacks during the fight, but if you slowed her down to a 5-tick pace, that would be 120 attacks during the fight. That's 30 less attacks used. Of course, she's not always attacking 100% of the fight. Sometimes maybe she's kneeling down when she just spawned some Blood Reavers. So maybe it's more like 20 less attacks have been used, which is still like a few brews worth of damage though. This little stall of Nex while you're meleeing her is definitely one of the biggest things you can do to lower some unavoidable damage that you take during the fight. Stalling can even be extended to a follow stall during the Zaros phase, but I'm not gonna lie, our team doesn't really bother with that because you don't need to do it. It's ideal to only stall her for like the 1 tick at a time, but it's not always a bad option stalling her a little bit longer. In general, if you're low health, you can get those 2 sips of brew in and then attack before she skips. Also, if she's about to use her siphon attack during that blood phase when she spawns spawns Blood Reavers. If you were really close to 1,360 health, it could be helpful for the player who's being targeted to stay under a little bit longer while the rest of the team gets her to that 1360 before she becomes invincible for a few seconds. The longer that you're standing under Nex, the less she is attacking, but if she skips away, this will guarantee that she's going to use a magic attack until players catch back up to her. Again though, the best strategy is just step under her right before she attacks and stall her for the 1 tick. Real quick, there is a RuneLite plugin called Radius Markers that can be used to see Nex's range very easily. This is definitely not a requirement. I've done most of my kills without using Radius Markers, but now that I've turned it on, I really don't plan on turning it back off. In the Radius Markers plugin, you want to make sure that you have checked the box that says include attack range, and then go ahead and add the radius marker down here with NPC ID 11,278. And then make sure this drop-down menu says range, and put a little 10 in this box. Make sure that this eye is checked rather than muted. Now, when you fight Nex, there will be this big square around her showing you her attack range, making it a little bit easier to deal with, like running away from her for the most part. If you do die at Nex, your items are going to be placed in a chest in that small room before the ancient prison. This chest works just like Vorkath's claiming system. It's going to cost you 100k to get your stuff back, but be careful. If you die while getting your stuff back, any items in that chest that you were going to claim are going to be lost forever. This is often not a problem. You can just protect yourself running back to the chest. I do suggest bringing a Zami, a Ceradomin, and an Armadil item. Usually the Bandos guys aren't going to see you during that run. You can run up to the frozen door without needing the god items, but if you disconnected or something went wrong there, you could lose all your stuff, so just bring those 3 god items just in case. You are going to lose all of your ancient essence that you stacked up anytime you leave the God Wars dungeon, so if you die, you'll lose any of that ancient essence, so you do have to get some more KC on the Reavers and the Mages before you can get back into the next fight. Now that we've talked about all the mechanics, let's just watch a full fight. I am sipping a Divine Ranging Potion and a Divine Super Combat, and then eating up some Anglerfish. I did tap the Imbued Heart there too, but that really isn't necessary. And the Menophyte Remedy can be a little bit of a bonus for not having to use as much Super Restore, but again, it is not needed. I do stand furthest away from Nex as she is spawning so that I will get the cough. I'm a little bit lazy about bringing the Slayer Helm because you just have to sip some extra Super Restore. Is not that big of a deal, but if you're trying to save some Super Restore, bring that Slayer Helm or face mask. The rest of the team has made sure to split up and at least be far enough away from me that they're not going to get the cough, and we just start poking Nex. It's a little sketchy to do the step under and stall Nex a little bit during this first phase, just in case you misclick and accidentally run towards the cough tank. Eventually, she's going to use that dash attack, and whoever she looks at just has to get out of the way, and we just repeat this until we finally have to fight Fumus. We all run over to Fumus using our range gear. We KO him. Again, we are looking for the cough and the dash attack are going to be alternating. Usually there is a second cough while we are fighting Fumus, and then maybe one more dash attack that resets next to the center right as we're going to get into the shadow phase. Once Fumus is dead, we want to switch to Protect from range and then stay far away from Nex while using range attacks, and then we're just really standing back and waiting for her to run up to us or for her to say to go ahead and fight Umbra. We did already have the Fear the Shadow special attack happen, and you'll see here she starts to run in. We go to step under her, and actually, this one doesn't work out so well. She does start to use range attacks, so we panic and run away. It's not too big of a deal if you don't get the skip. As you can see, you can just run over out of her range, make sure you heal up, and just start attacking again. Of course, it's ideal if she had just reset back to the center, but you don't have to have an ideal kill every time to be able to just get the next kill and make a lot of money out of this. So because of that first skip not really working well, we did kind of have to shuffle Nex around a little bit, but eventually she calls for Umbra. At the moment, it looks like Donnie is the Umbra tank, so he's protecting from magic. But as you can see, Nex went to take him down, so he had to switch over to protect from range, and it was time for one of us to become the Umbra tank. It took a second for Umbra to start hitting me, but once I saw she was attacking me, I switched over to protect from magic, and we still have Nex kind of close, so I want to keep an eye on her. If she comes running up to me, it would be best to try to step under her and get her to skip towards the center, and then protect from range while that happens too, so I don't tank too much damage. But at this point, Umbra is dead, and we are on to the blood phase. So everybody else is switching over to protect from magic. I immediately got that blood sacrifice, so I ran away and ran back in to start working on the kill again. It is best to be spread out as much as you can during this blood phase because the blood attacks are a barrage spell with an area of effect. But sometimes while people are stepping under or you're running over to the blood reavers, like occasionally you guys might be a little too close. You don't have to be perfect at it by any means. When the blood reavers spawn, we just KO them, go back to Nex, and we're waiting to get Nex to 1,360 health. Now we're doing some decent DPS here, but during the blood phase, she's also healing, so you got to pay attention to the fact that you're going to get more blood sacrifices and more blood reavers. If you heal her up too much with those special attacks, it can take a while to get through this blood phase. Finally, she calls for Cruor's help. We do switch over to some range gear. She is going to use the Siphon special attack here very soon, but we're going to be done with Cruor fast enough that she'll just despawn these Reavers at the end of the blood phase, and she won't get any health from them. You'll notice she did use one blood sacrifice right at the end of that phase, but Donnie was able to get out of there. And then at the beginning of the ice phase, she immediately used Contain This. Everybody steps back and switches to range gear for 2 attacks before the ice disappears, and you can switch back to your Fang and begin poking her again. Make sure you're always using Protect Mage during this phase because she can freeze you. Eventually, Nex uses the Ice Prison attack, and we go ahead and make sure to stab one of the stalagmites with the Fang to get Hallow out of that Ice Prison, and then begin to stab Nex again. Eventually, we'll get Nex to 680 health, and it's time to run over to Glacies. Again, she's still going to be alternating special attacks. Every 5 regular attacks, she'll then use Contain This. 5 more regular attacks, we get the Ice Prison, and so on. Once Glacies is done, it is time for Zaros Phase. We do want to be standing close to Nex to try to get her to use as few magic attacks as possible, and then we're mostly just paying attention to those overhead prayers. This is a good time to dump some Voidwaker specs when she's deflecting damage because the Voidwaker is actually a magic attack. Other than that, you want to be using range whenever she's deflecting melee damage, and then when she turns off that deflect, go ahead and put on your Fang and poke again. You should be protecting from melee while Nex is targeting you, and if you take too much damage, you do want to step under her and try to heal. If you step under her too long, she will skip, and you don't really want that to happen during the Zaros phase, but it is easy to recover from if that does happen. She'll just keep rotating between Soul Split, Deflect Melee, and then no overhead prayer. Every 5 attacks that she uses, she will switch that prayer. Once she hits 0 health, she's using Wrath, so you want to run away, and then you can pick up your loot. If you have any questions about the next fight, be sure to let me know in the comments. Finally, let's talk about the loot from Nex. Every kill, Nex is going to drop 2 items in a large lump sum and then divvy that out to the team. Her regular drops are not great. Sometimes when you hit like the Rune Ore or the Onyx Bolts in a small team, you get a decent drop that pays for your supplies, but there's a lot of crap drops in there too. Just like any God Wars dungeon boss, the profit here is mostly from uniques. This is tough when you're first getting into Nex. You're going to use a lot more brews early in your grind, so before you get a split, you're kind of hemorrhaging cash a little bit. After one Nex split, you will not have to worry about supplies ever again though. Nex's unique drops work a little bit differently than other bosses. The base chance for a unique is a 1 in 43. Each player gets their own roll towards the unique, and that roll depends on how much damage you did to Nex and her bodyguards. So let's say a team of 3 players each did an equal amount of damage. Y'all did the exact same damage. Every player would each roll their own 1 in 129 chance to land on that unique table. You're very unlikely to do equal amounts of damage though. It'll be separated a little bit. Whoever does the most damage will have a better roll, and then players dealing the least damage are going to be less likely to get a unique. The MVP of the fight also gets a bonus 10% chance for a unique, so if you did the most damage and your roll landed at about a 1 in 100, as the MVP, you would actually roll a 1 in 90. Because of that 10% bonus from the MVP, the team as a whole has a slightly better chance than a 1 in 43 to get the unique, but for the most part, it really just boils down to 1 in 43, and the more damage that you do, the better chance that you get the drop. The interesting part about how that unique drop works is that everyone is getting their own roll, so everyone can get an item in the same kill. It's very rare to see multiple drops in one kill, but overall, like if you see somebody else get a unique, it doesn't actually take away from your chances of getting a unique. When you do hit the unique table, there are 6 different items that you can get. You have a 3 out of 12 chance for Zarya of Embraces, 2 out of 12 for the Nile Horn, 2 out of 12 for Torva Helm, 2 out of 12 for Torva Plate Body, 2 out of 12 for Torva Plate Legs, and then finally a 1 out of 12 chance to get the Ancient Hilt. The Ancient Hilt is the cheapest item on this list, but also the rarest, which bodes well for your profits. Most of Nex uniques are extremely expensive. Right now, if you hit the unique drop table, it averages out 273 mil. This does take into account the odds for different items. This is not just the average price of the drops. Divide that by 43, you're averaging around 6.3 mil GP per kill. Now that is for the whole team. So a team of 6, each person's getting a little over 1 mil per kill from uniques. You get some money from regular drops too, but those rarely add up to that much, and this is all just an estimate anyway. So obviously each hour and next session is going to be a little bit different than the last. A 4-man team would be averaging just over 1.5 mil per kill each from uniques, so they would have to manage just under 7 kills an hour to be sitting at 10 mil an hour GP. Now, how fast you get a Nex kill is going to vary depending on a lot of factors, your team size, each player's gear setup, and of course, just how good you are at the fight. The more kills that you get on any boss, the faster and more efficient you're going to be doing that boss. Nex is a long fight, so sometimes just a kill-to-kill basis, one fight could be a lot longer or shorter than the other too. In a duo setup, I would expect 4 to 6 kills an hour, maybe like a 7 to 8 number in max gear and minimum mistakes. And then in teams of 5 to 6, you're more like up to 12 to 15 kills per hour, maybe less if you all have minimum gear, and maybe some of you have been dying too. Overall, it doesn't take too long for a team to reach the 43 kills for a drop rate. Sometimes you don't get a drop during that drop rate, but sometimes you'll see multiple in a short period of time too. Either way, the Nex drops add up very well. The more small teams Nex kills that you do, the more GP you will have. Nex also has a pet drop at a 1 in 500 base chance. This pet drop works just like the uniques. Each player has their own role based on how much damage they did. The pet is also pretty sick because it runs around just like Nex does. This is actually one of the cooler pets in the game. If you still have any questions about that Nex grind, be sure to let me know in the comments section and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. If you've been enjoying these videos or just getting some useful information out of them, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. I also stream on Twitch, which should be linked on the screen and in the description. Thank you for watching, everyone, and best of luck on your next grind.